This video is sponsored by ExpressVPN. So recently, I was playing Obsidian's early access survival game Grounded, and despite thinking I could handle my phobias, I found myself struggling to play for long due to the relentlessly terrifying spider encounters. But strangely enough, it reinvigorated my distressing childhood curiosity towards these creatures as an icon of fear, calling back to a video I made a few years ago called The Untold History of Spider Movies. In that video, I explored the origins of the subgenre and created my own theoretical timeline for how it developed throughout the years, starting with the creature feature boom of the 40s and 50s, and ending with perhaps the last major theatrical outing around 20 years ago. However, I unfortunately spent so little time on each movie that I wasn't able to give them the full horror Hollinger treatment, as it were, so having felt the proverbial bite to once again spiral into the subgenre, let's revisit one of, if not the most insane mainstream spider movie ever made. Eight-Legged Freaks tells the story of a toxic chemical spill that seeps its way into a local spider farm via contaminated crickets, causing these scampering little shits to gradually mutate in size and begin devouring bigger and bigger prey, before eventually escalating to an outright invasion on a small Arizona town ironically called Prosperity that's built upon a complex mining system where the spiders nest. It's a self-proclaimed B-movie, both in presentation and marketing, with Scream's David Arquette serving as the satirical symbol of the film's indulgent spoof, or rather homage, on the American creature feature boom. In my original video, I said that the film's main flaw was that it can be very hit or miss in terms of both comedy and horror, because it doesn't wholeheartedly commit to the concept of a B-movie in any noticeably clever way, and instead, like Mars Attacks, it softly blends into a safe conservative formula. But with that said, as someone with an atrocious fear of spiders, naturally Eight-Legged Freaks had an easier time getting an automatic reaction out of me, because there were times, I'll admit, I did shiver and look over my shoulder. Not only are the spiders occasionally sneaky and unpredictable, but there are times where the movie is fairly violent. Sure, not enough to be considered gruesome or shocking by any means, but it ends up falling into the same bracket as Tremors, where it just borders on being a more adult film, if that makes sense. I say this because I noticed something during my recent rewatch that I missed the first time I saw it, where in this scene you have people presumably being eaten alive like a censored version of Starship Troopers, but there's a line at the beginning of the film where the spider farmer Joshua says this particular spider injects acidic venom into its prey to liquefy its insides, and with that added context, this already harrowing scene becomes an agonizing wholly horrifying shit way to go. Like I said, understandably, the movie is much less effective if you don't fear spiders, but there are a lot of other quirks and curiosities to sink our fangs into that make this weirdly wholesome, if indeed morbid spider movie, an unforgettable watch. As always, as we go along, please make sure to leave your thoughts and observations in the comments below, considering liking, subscribing, and maybe sharing the video. And lastly, here are a few words from this video's sponsor, ExpressVPN. As someone who brings their work everywhere they go, I find myself using a lot of public Wi-Fi, especially in cafes. However, using public Wi-Fi without a VPN practically leaves me vulnerable to potential third-party snoopers and sneaky individuals who might attempt to steal my private information like credit card details, account logins, and more. But thanks to ExpressVPN, I can relax because it encrypts my data and masks my IP address using one of their 160 server locations locations so that nobody can steal my data. Without ExpressVPN, it would be like if I took a shower and gave the world a VIP invitation to have a peek. The point is, we all deserve our privacy. One of the features I love most about ExpressVPN's app is its straightforward and intuitive transparency. Look, I am not tech savvy in the slightest, and so it's far less daunting when protecting myself online is as hassle-free as opening a drop-down list, selecting a location of my choice, and then using ExpressVPN's accessible privacy and security tools. I can easily and immediately see information about where I'm connected to, how my IP address is hidden, and have the comforting reassurance that ExpressVPN has my back in this big bad world. Heck, even in the sudden event of a technical interruption, ExpressVPN comes loaded with an automatic network kill switch that prevents data being leaked, so I appreciate the extra security. With a 30-day money-back guarantee, find out how you can get 3 months free by clicking the link in the description box below or visiting expressvpn.com/Ryan. So, in my last video, I was saying that the sci-fi creature feature Pitch Black was a perfect example of an early 2000s anomaly because it came out of nowhere and ended up being a surprise hit that went on to spawn a franchise. In many respects, Eight-Legged Freaks comes relatively close to being a similar anomaly, except its dull reception and box office performance more or less makes sense given it had all the variables of something nobody at the time was asking for. I suppose, in theory, and with a leap in logic, Warner Brothers could have seen it as a potential summer sleeper hit that lightly attempted to capitalize on the release of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, because with the lack of trending genre interest or A-level star power, Eight-Legged Freaks is the type of film I'd argue today would end up being sold to a streaming service.
What exactly is it? Spider-Man?
It wasn't exactly a tough sell, but given that the movie predated mass social media consumption, it didn't have the legs to pull off what B-movies like Snakes on a Plane did a few years later, if of course that movie's virality didn't exactly translate into ticket sales. Anyway, Eight-Legged Freaks definitely has the whimsical charm of a summer B-movie by closely mimicking the tropes and cliches of the typical monster movie, including the desert town, the exacerbating danger, the corny townsfolk, and a little hint of superstition.
This is a government cover-up, isn't it?
But unfortunately, it also suffers from the old age monster movie curse of underdeveloped human characters that somewhat undermine the absurdity of its premise. It's actually quite frustrating in this case because the general outline of the various personalities is really good, and I was invested to see how their stories would play out, except none of their stories ever do play out. You have a solid cast who reliably commit to their characters, making them all feel fairly distinct and personable, but their setups filter out so quickly as we approach the grand invasion that it makes a lot of the human stuff feel pointlessly vapid. Hell, the one thing that really distracted me is that there are a few very mild characters established super late into the film that left me confused as to why any attention was given to them. Like, I'm sure I'm not the only person who thought this, but who the fuck is this guy? Why does he suddenly become a loose focal point? Did he win a contest to be in the film? Is he mates with the filmmakers? To this day, I still do not understand why he even exists. Is he even there? Am I the only one who sees him? I guess you could argue it's deliberate that the human drama withers out because there are technically more pressing matters to attend to, but there's so many little details set up that fail to go anywhere. For example, the main human conflict is the future of the town's mining system, which the town's opportunistic mayor Wade intends to sell purely for his own financial gain, following his failed attempt to profit from a mall that has taken business away from the locals. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on this because the film very swiftly brushes over it. When the inheriting son of the mine's owner, Chris, arrives in town, he aims to restart the mines once they're clear of methane gas, thus reinvigorating the town's dwindling economy. But significantly, there's this implication that before Chris's father died, he discovered that the mines were being illegally used to dump chemical waste with the aid of the mayor, which is reinforced by the mysterious chemical truck that kickstarts the carnage to begin with. In my opinion, it's a very interesting detail that plays both into the environmental themes of pre- and post-war creature features and generates a literal lingering urgency that the town is practically built on a dangerously unstable foundation. But ultimately, it's just Chekhov's gun for the climax, and Wade never gets the comeuppance you'd expect, leaving all these notions of the town being in crippling debt and wasting away, and in general, the town's somber atmosphere feel like a wasted opportunity. It's pretty much the same contention used in Tremors, where nobody wants to be in this town, but they have nowhere else to go. So it's kinda like they're in a pen of sorts, just waiting for something to consume them. The truth is, you really don't get a good enough feel for the town because you barely get a chance to immerse yourself within it, which is fine to an extent because the movie never forgets to remind you that the spiders are obviously the stars of the show. So here's the thing about exaggerating the spider for dramatic effect. On one extreme you have Kingdom of the Spiders and Arachnophobia spiders being just the right realistic size to be scary, and then on the other extreme you have the gigantic Godzilla-esque monster territory spiders that don't really do anything for me. Eight-legged freaks hits just the right nightmarish sweet spot because they're on a sort of eyeline level scale with you where you're pretty much up close and personal with something capable of overpowering you. However, there's a point within Eight-legged freaks where just as things begin to properly scale, some of the spiders come off as cute as opposed to outright horrifying. In fact, some of them have actual voice actors from iconic shows, including the guy who voiced Nibbler in Futurama. Now, originally, I thought that it created a bit of a power struggle over how exactly I was supposed to feel about the spiders as a threat, but to be honest, the balance feels appropriate to keeping you on your toes, because one minute you're like, "Aw, they're so adorably dumb," and then the next, you've got these fucking muscle-bound deck-collecting heavies hiding in trapdoors beneath the ground. Regardless of how schlocky the whole thing is, it never makes it look like a pleasant way to go. In fact, probably the only victim to get it somewhat easy is the one who just gets the shit kicked out of them. I still think the acid kill is the grimmest, but honorable mention has to go to the guy in the barbershop who I distinctly remember because it was one of the main clips used in the trailer. I don't know, it's just something about spiders just wrapping things up, just ugh. Lastly, before we move on, the eventual rampage on the town is blissfully insane, but I'll admit I find the siege within the mall rather disappointing because despite all the build-up and preparations for battle, the second hundreds of spiders start swarming in, everybody just fucking bails. I mean, the idea of it being anticlimactic again feels somewhat deliberate because it's kinda what I'd expect would happen in such stressful conditions, yet I still feel cheated out of a big fight scene. But it is possibly down to a logistic limitation due to the challenges of choreographing the animation with the performances, because credit where credit is due, there is a lot going on for such a relatively small budget. Now, before we end, I want to go back to the human drama for a bit and talk about some of the main characters, because it's worth addressing how their personalities carry a large portion of the film. Firstly, I want to address Ashley's boyfriend Brett, because I do not understand why they chose to reignite their connection after he tries to pressure her character into having sex. It completely downplays such an ugly scene by trying to frame it as Brett being some sort of hopeless romantic hiding behind a peer pressure bad boy persona, but it's also curiously juxtaposed with Ashley's overprotective mother Sam warning her about Brett because it reminded her of her own past dealing with her unfaithful ex. It's revealed near the end that Chris actually beat up Sam's ex for cheating on her, hence the romantic tension between them since he obviously cares about her. But oddly enough, Chris is also established as having a bad boy persona as well, that in this case you immediately see through, given Arquette has a natural awkward sensitivity to him. The point is, it's unusual that both Brett and Chris have similar characterization, except one is obviously sincere and likable, and the other is just a pathetic weasel who only cares about his bike, which ironically has just as much personality. If there were two characters I would have loved to have seen more of, making it even weirder that this guy takes up so much screen time, seriously, am I fucking missing something here? It would be Deputy Pete and Aunt Gladys, the latter being the emotional component to Chris's story given she becomes the climax's damsel in distress, and the former because he's lovably goofy. In fact, there's a very brief scene where Pete's wife leaves him after their cat is murdered by a spider, and it's just such an oddly placed tragic moment that I'm so glad he makes it out alive. Like, he really gets by on the skin of his teeth here. Lastly, we have Harlan, the resident radio conspiracy theorist who 20 years later has gone from being the most ridiculous character to arguably one of the most realistic. He's the hypocrite who will buy his own absurd bullshit, but nobody else's. The blatant joke of his character is that he sprouts all this nonsense about government cover-ups and aliens, and yet has a hard time believing in giant spiders. Hell, probably the most outlandish joke I discovered on my rewatch is that for some reason, the sheriff's department has Lee Harvey Oswald's gun, which further plays into the conspiracy angle if you understand the reference. With all that said, my short overall summary for Eight-Legged Freaks is that it's a perpetually rewatchable innocent slice of schlock that, for all its rough character edges, manages to be remarkably engaging thanks to consistent escalating action. If there's enough interest in the comments, I will consider covering other Spider movies in the future, along with other creepy crawly movies, because it is the one gimmick that surprisingly works very well on me. So until next time, stay safe, stay away from you know what, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.